You really need to hear this before your next trip to New River Gorge National Park, because what happened there will change the way you feel about these Appalachian mountains once the sun goes down. In September of 2016, an 18-year veteran park ranger named Grady West was finishing a routine overnight patrol at the Sandstone Station, deep inside the park in southern West Virginia. Radio checks, perimeter walks, the same loop he'd run 1,000 times before. Everything was normal until his 10 o'clock sweep of the Fayetteville lot, where a fresh set of tire tracks cut across gravel the entry gate had no record of, parked beside a single child's sneaker, bone dry despite 6 hours of rain. An hour later, his radio cut to static, and a woman's voice said his daughter's name before the frequency went completely dead. By the time his shift ended, Grady had requested an immediate transfer off night patrol. A request the park approved without a single question, with nothing on file beyond 2 lines about equipment malfunction. Whatever happened at Grandview Overlook before sunrise, the rangers at New River Gorge don't talk about it, and Grady hasn't worked another night shift since. What you're about to hear is his account. His name is Grady West, and this is what happened to him. Two hours into the overnight shift, Grady West sat at the Sandstone Station, a single-room outpost on the southern edge of New River Gorge National Park, 50 miles from the nearest stoplight. Badge 114. 18 years with the Park Service. On his wrist, his father's old dive watch. The crystal scratched, the hands frozen at 12:47. The exact minute a roof fall outside Princeton took 5 men in 1987, his father among them. Grady didn't wear it for the time. He wore it so he'd never forget what happened when somebody wasn't fast enough. Tonight's plan was simple. Radio checks every 30 minutes, a perimeter walk at the top of each hour, 8 hours, and then Deb Pruitt would pull in at 6 and he could go home and not think about the wedding invitation sitting unopened on his kitchen counter. His ex-wife, remarrying next month, an RSVP he had no intention of sending. He'd texted his daughter before clocking in. "Good night, Em. Love you." No reply yet. She was 12. 12-year-olds didn't text back, not yet anyway. Outside, the New River did what it always did after dark, a low roar rising out of the gorge, steady enough that the rangers stopped hearing it after the first month on the job. Tonight, though, something was missing underneath that roar. The cicadas, screaming since July every night, had gone dead silent all at once, the way they did right before a hard frost. Except it was September. 71 degrees. The only thing still moving near the station was one moth, throwing itself against the porch light, over and over, the lone living thing Grady had seen since his relief left at 6. On the dispatch board, somebody had scrawled FFW, Gorge, until 0500, a flash flood watch, standard this time of year. Grady had seen those letters 100 times without a second thought. He wouldn't get the chance to think about much else. Not after tonight. He clipped his radio to his vest and started his first perimeter walk, and somewhere in the back of his mind, Wendell's voice showed up, uninvited, the way it always did. The first lie you tell yourself after a bad night isn't "I'm fine." It's "I can handle the next one alone." The first perimeter walk came back clean. Same trail markers, same dark windows at the visitor center, same nothing. Grady logged it on the dispatch board, grabbed his keys, and headed out for the 10 o'clock sweep down to the Fayetteville lot, a gravel pull-off about 1.5 miles from the station, the kind of place that filled up with climbers and rafters by 9 in the morning and sat completely empty after dark. The drive down was nothing. About 5 minutes of switchbacks, his headlights the only light for miles. The gate counter at the entrance read 0000, 0 cars in, 0 cars out, the same number it had read since 6 o'clock. Grady had checked that counter 1,000 times over the years. It had never once been wrong. Tonight it was. His headlights swept across the gravel and caught a second set of tire tracks, not his own, which had gone soft and shapeless in the rain 2 hours ago, but a fresh set, deep-treaded, the edges still sharp and clean, cutting straight across ground that had been turning to mud since the afternoon storm. Somebody had driven in here. Somebody the gate hadn't logged. He put the truck in park and sat there a second, looking at them the way a person looks at a math problem that doesn't add up no matter how many times they run it. The chain on the gate behind him should have been swinging. There was almost always a little wind down in this bowl, enough to rattle it against the post. But tonight it hung dead still, like the air itself had stopped moving along with everything else. A shoe. It was set upright on the gravel, just beyond the tire marks, like somebody had placed it there instead of dropping it. A small white sneaker with a cartoon dinosaur stitched on the side, the kind a kid wears to school. Grady got out, the gravel cold and wet through the soles of his boots, and crouched down next to it. The rain that had been coming down on this lot for 6 straight hours hadn't touched it. Bone dry, not a drop, like it had been sitting in this exact spot under a roof that wasn't there. He photographed it for the lost and found log, because that's what 18 years of training told a person to do with things that didn't add up. Log it, don't dwell on it, and got back to his feet. He didn't know yet that this would be the last normal thing he photographed all night. He was 3 steps from the truck when the radio on his vest cut to static. Not the regular hiss it made when he lost signal down in the gorge. This was close, tight, clean static, the kind a radio makes when somebody is holding the mic an inch from their mouth and pressing the button without saying a word. Grady froze, hand halfway to the door handle, the static crawling up through his vest like it was coming from inside his own chest. Underneath it, a voice. A woman's voice, clear as anything, like she was standing close enough to touch. Emma. Just that. One word. His daughter's name, in a voice that wasn't dispatch, wasn't Deb, wasn't anybody Grady had heard on this channel in 18 years on the job. Then the radio went dead. Not quiet. Dead, the kind of nothing that meant the equipment itself had stopped working, not just dropped out of range. For a second, the whole lot felt exactly that quiet too. No river, no wind, no hum from his own truck. Like somebody had reached out and turned the volume down on the entire gorge. Grady keyed the mic. Once, twice, a third time. Nothing answered. On the 4th try, a smell hit him out of nowhere. Sharp, metallic, copper like biting down on a battery. And then it was gone, just as fast as it came, leaving behind nothing but the wet gravel smell of the lot, the tire tracks nobody could explain, and the sound of his own breathing, a little too loud in his own ears. Grady drove to the visitor center, not because the radio mattered all that much, not really, but because checking it against the hardline gave him something to do with his hands, and right now his hands needed something to do. The drive over took 4 minutes. He didn't remember most of it, eyes on the rear view, checking for headlights that weren't there. The building sat dark when he pulled up, exactly the way he'd left it at 8. Alarm light blinking green, steady, undisturbed. Front door locked. Everything where it should be, which should have made him feel better, and didn't. He let himself in anyway. The visitor center at night was always quiet, but tonight the quiet had a texture to it, pressing against his eardrums instead of sitting there empty. The brass doorknob bit into his palm the second he touched it. Cold, colder than a September night had any business making metal that had been sitting inside a heated building all evening. He flexed his fingers as the door swung open, the cold lingering like he'd grabbed a handful of ice. Inside, the place smelled like it always did. Coffee, dust, the faint mildew of a building this close to a river. Grady crossed to the front desk and laid his hand flat on the logbook to flip it open, and the cover was damp under his palm. Not wet. Cold damp, the specific kind of damp that comes off something that's been sitting in a refrigerator. He flipped to today's entry to log the radio issue and stopped. There was already an entry on today's line. His entry. His handwriting. The looping lowercase g's he'd written that way since high school. The flat-topped sevens, a habit he'd picked up from his father without ever meaning to. 3 clipped lines. Incident at Grandview Overlook, approximately 0130. Equipment malfunction. Reporting Ranger G. West. The date at the top of the entry read, September 15th, tomorrow. His signature was already there at the bottom, in ink that hadn't fully dried. He could see it catch the desk lamp, still slightly wet at the edges, like he'd written it 30 seconds ago instead of never. For a second, Grady almost laughed. Almost. Somebody on the day shift messing with him, somebody who knew his handwriting that well, which was nobody, not in 18 years, not even Deb, or his own exhaustion, playing tricks with a date he'd glanced at sideways under bad lighting. Either one was easier to believe, so for a second, he did. And that's exactly when Wendell's voice showed up again, the same as it had at the start of the shift, except louder this time. The first lie you tell yourself after a bad night isn't that you're fine. It's that you can handle the next one alone. Grady didn't call it in. The radio was dead anyway, he told himself. What was dispatch going to do? Drive 40 minutes through a flash flood watch because of something written in a logbook? He got back in the truck and turned the key. The engine caught, loud in all that quiet. Outside, the fog had come up off the river while he was inside. Thick, gray, rolling in low across the lot with no wind behind it at all. Nothing pushing it, like it had just decided to be there. His headlights hit it and pushed it around instead of through it. The beams turning into 2 soft cones that didn't reach more than 20 feet. The gate at the lot entrance had squeaked on the same rusted hinge for 3 administrations. Grady had heard that squeak so many times he didn't hear it anymore, the way a person stops hearing their own heartbeat. Tonight, it didn't make a sound at all when he passed through it. He didn't notice. He was already 3 minutes into the drive toward Grandview, telling himself this was just a perimeter check, the same as 100 others. Therefore, there was nothing about tonight that needed to be any different. And on the dash in front of him, the clock read 12:47. It had read 12:47 for the last 4 minutes. Grandview's lot was empty when Grady pulled in. No cars, no lights, nothing but his own headlights hitting a wall of fog so thick it ate the split-rail fence at 15 feet and gave nothing back. He cut the engine. The silence afterward had weight, the kind that pressed against his ears the way deep water does. He sat there a second longer than he needed to. Then he got out. Gravel crunched under his boots, loud in all that nothing. And from somewhere out past the fence, past where the overlook should drop 400 feet into the gorge, a second set of footsteps answered his. 1 step behind, then ahead. Out of sync like an echo that had learned to walk on its own. Grady stopped. The footsteps didn't. For 1 second, there was hope. Maybe Deb had come early. Maybe a trail crew was out doing storm checks. Maybe anything boring enough to laugh about in the morning. Something resolved out of the fog near the edge. A shape, upright, the size and build of a person. The dark green of a Park Service uniform just barely catching what little light there was. For half a breath, that was almost a relief. Another ranger. Then something about it was wrong, and it took him a second to place it. It wasn't shifting its weight, not rocking on its heels, not breathing. It stood facing out over the gorge, hands loose at its sides, on a stretch of ground that didn't exist. There was no trail there, no ledge wide enough for boots to stand on, just air and 400 feet of it, and this thing standing on top of it like the drop wasn't a problem. Hey! Grady's hand found his radio out of 18 years of habit, even though he already knew it wouldn't transmit. "This is Ranger West. Identify yourself." The figure turned. It turned before he finished the sentence, a half-second early, like it had heard the words before he'd said them, like it had been waiting on a cue only it could hear. It had his face. Not similar. His. The 2-day stubble he hadn't shaved before shift, the nick on his jaw from last week, every detail right down to the badge pinned at the same crooked angle Grady had never fixed. But the mouth was wrong. Stretched a fraction too wide, curled into a smile Grady's own face had never made in 41 years of mirrors, not once, not even close. The ground under Grady's boots seemed to tilt, just slightly, the way it does right before a person understands they're standing too close to an edge. Its right wrist came up, checking the time. An old habit, Grady's habit. And on Grady's own wrist, the watch that hadn't moved since 1987, the one frozen at 12:47, his father's watch, ticked once. He felt it before he heard it. One single mechanical heartbeat against his pulse, the second hand jumping forward a notch and going still again. Like something underneath the glass had just woken up long enough to remind him it could. The wind came up out of nowhere, carrying the whetstone smell of the gorge, and underneath it, something else. Coal smoke, sour and sweet at the same time, thick at the back of his throat, the same copper taste from the lot 4 hours ago. A smell Grady hadn't breathed since he was 12 years old, riding in the truck to the hospital with that exact smell coming off his father's coveralls. The figure spoke. It wasn't its own voice. It was his father's. A voice Grady hadn't heard outside of dreams in 29 years, low and tired and certain. "You couldn't save him. You won't save her either." Behind Grady, the gorge cleared its throat. There was no other way to put it. A long, grinding groan rolling up out of the dark, and his headlights swung wide enough as he turned to catch the access road already running ankle-deep with brown water. More water than 6 hours of rain could explain, pouring down off the ridge like the mountain had sprung a leak. The flood watch wasn't a watch anymore. The road back to Sandstone was going under, and the figure was standing between him and the truck. Run. Gravel under his boots. His shoulder clipped the fence post, hard enough to leave a bruise he wouldn't notice until morning. He didn't look at the edge. He didn't look at the figure. He didn't remember crossing the gravel. He remembered the truck door and the engine catching on the second try and the watch on his wrist ticking again, a second time, as the tires found pavement that was, for now, still dry. Grady made it back to Sandstone with 40 minutes to spare before Deb's shift started. Dawn hadn't broken yet, but the sky out over the gorge had gone from black to the dark gray-blue that comes right before it. The access road had held, wet but passable, the water already pulling back toward the river, the way floodwater does once it's finished doing whatever it came to do. The gorge behind him had gone quiet again. Same river roar, same missing cicadas, the same silence sitting over everything the way it had all night. Except now it felt different, not empty. Listening. He wrote his report at the same desk, in the same looping handwriting from the logbook downstairs. Equipment malfunction, likely fatigue-related disorientation. And on that same page, in 3 clipped lines, he requested a permanent transfer off night patrol. His hand didn't shake while he wrote it. He noticed that the same careful way a person notices anything else worth filing away. It was approved by Friday. Nobody asked an 18-year ranger with a spotless file why he suddenly wanted days only, and Grady didn't offer a reason. He called Wendell that morning, told him he'd had a bad night and hadn't had a drink. Wendell said that was the only part that mattered. 3 weeks later, his daughter called. An actual call, not a text. She told him about a dream she'd had on the night of September 14th. A man in a ranger uniform standing at the edge of something dark, calling her name over and over. The way somebody calls your name when they're trying to get your attention before something else does. She said it didn't feel like a nightmare. It felt like somebody trying to warn her. Grady told her it was probably just a coincidence. He meant it too, the same way a man means it when he's already decided, ahead of time, not to believe his own ears. On the windowsill at the Sandstone station, the moth from that night is still there. Dead now. Wings folded, perfectly intact, the way a moth looks after it's been sitting in one spot for weeks instead of hours. Nobody remembers it being there before September. Nobody's swept it away since. Here's the detail I promised you. The one most people don't talk about. That sneaker. The small white one with the dinosaur on it, sitting bone dry in a lot that had been rained on for 6 hours. Grady photographed it that night for the lost and found log, the way he was trained to. When he checked back 3 days later, the photo was in the system. The shoe wasn't. Nobody at New River Gorge has any record of it being logged in, claimed, or thrown out. It's just gone. The same way that entry in tomorrow's logbook was gone by the time Deb came on shift, except Grady never told anyone. I can't explain any of it. Not the watch, not the voice, not the road. I've tried. What I keep coming back to more than any of that is the shoe. Small, white, dry, sitting upright in the rain like somebody set it there on purpose in a national park deep in the Appalachian Mountains, where 18 years of training tells a person, log it, don't dwell on it. If you've ever camped anywhere near that gorge, drop it in the comments. I want to know if anything out there ever felt like it was listening back. And if you've got a theory about whose shoe that was, I'm reading every single one.